I tell you what happened. When Hurricane Katrina came, the people of New Orleans in the lower ninth ward left here in the exodus, but we could come back.
With the aftermath flooding of Hurricane Katrina, areas such as the lower ninth ward had water rise up to the roofs of the houses. In our effort to rebuild New Orleans, what do you propose we do in the areas that are substantially below sea level?
Because the areas that are substantially below sea level have had most of their building fabric totally destroyed, and those areas have to be bulldozed entirely, it doesn't make sense to rebuild in those areas. I mean, it's a foolish proposition. They should be, in a lot of those cases, they should be using that as a strategy to introduce environmental areas into the city, to shrink back the footprint, and to look at how they can relocate the population that existed in those neighborhoods in other parts of the city, to increase the density in other parts of the city, and to help develop new kinds of infrastructure, both physical infrastructure and social infrastructure, in those other parts of the city that are above sea level, that still have a lot of blighted properties, empty space, like the areas that we're looking at in urban build, places like Central City, that can accommodate about 3-4 times the density or more than of what they have right now.
You know why? I've been on the street for 29 years. I've been in this lower ninth ward a total of 55 years.
Right.
These are my streets. You know.
But are the streets the same
The streets are. You know, when you can see life, you can see people, then you have some hope. Because when I came in October last year, and it was so desolate, it looked like something out of one of them sci-fi movies. You know, cars on top of cars, houses on top of cars, houses on top of houses and things. And it was, in some sense, it was unbelievable. Even though I'd been through this 40 years ago in middle school in Hurricane Katrina. But it just wasn't the same. The devastation was so much more greater. And now, a part of our community is basically washed away.
How do we deal with the people who are attached to where they live and they want to rebuild in the communities?
It's a difficult problem because first there have to be both fair and sophisticated ways of dealing with evaluating and valuing property, compensating owners for their property, because they would have to rebuild entirely. The point is that there are memories of a place that are important, but the neighborhoods that they're attached to don't exist anymore in a lot of cases. They've been wiped out. The houses that they've been attached to have also radically transformed. And it's very hard to deal with that memory, but it's really important that there's a process, and it's a social process as much as a psychological process and an educational process, to help people understand first that it doesn't make sense for them to rebuild in an area that's entirely threatened. It doesn't make sense for them to rebuild in an area where we don't have the capacity to develop the infrastructure. We literally don't have the funds or resources in the city, and it makes no sense to be establishing this incredibly extensive network, whether it's support like power, gas, roads, electricity, etc., to neighborhoods where there is a very low density and where everything has to be entirely reconstructed.
I want to come back home. Right. So back in October of last year, this radio show host named Steve Esky on NPR came to New Orleans, and we ended up connected, and in October we came to visit my house and visit the community. And I was able to bring him around to all this devastation to show him, tell him how life was in the lower ninth ward before Katrina. That this here was an old family neighborhood and thing, and there was generational families, and the homes were generational homes.
Right.
And we maintained our community because we had our way of life. I grew up down here, and when I got married, I continued living down there. bought my home down here. I had options to move to other places in the city, but this is where I was most comfortable at.
For the most part, we're a far more nomadic population in America, whereas New Orleans is one place where this didn't necessarily occur, meaning that it's got the highest percentage of people who grew up on a piece of land whose parents lived there before and whose their parents lived there before that. And in some cases it goes all the way back to the history of the plantations, where people, especially those that were either worker populations or slave populations, that their emancipation and their link to that land happened at that point in time. And so they have a very dense and deep history that's associated with their freedom, and freedom is linked up to landscape and to a particular location, you know. That doesn't happen in a lot of parts of America right now because people are so much more nomadic. And so it's a far more difficult situation. Add the deep cultural history to the economic and educational history where, because of economics, people also didn't leave. They weren't leaving for new job opportunities elsewhere. You know, they had families that were all located here. Until the flood, a huge population of the city had never actually left the city. You know, for me, that's inconceivable, but for this population, it's saying they were a very, very, very local population. So for you to introduce the idea of moving 10 blocks or to what they think is the other side of town, which might only be, you know, 20 blocks, this is a small city, is a huge, inappropriate directive. And yet, for someone who's used to traveling across the country or traveling around the world or who's lived in 5 different cities, it's you know, people come in here and they say, I can't imagine why you would want to go and build in a totally devastated environment. I go into Lakeview and think exactly the same thing. I drive down these streets, it's a ghost town, and you see one person sitting there, and they're living amidst this disaster. And you sit there and say, why would that person want to rebuild their house on that site instead of saying, you know what, I can move into another part of the city that's inhabited, where there's culture, there's life, there's resources, I can get a new place, and my life will be substantially better than it would be sort of trying to do it all over again. Some cases people do it because of attachment, some cases they do it because they have lost everything, and if there's no mechanism in place to help make that transition, then they feel that all they have is to restore their initial property. And that's why, you know, the onus is also on the leadership to establish methods, financial means, processes that actually help people move from one zone to another. And that would be both psychological and social and communal support, financial support, and that hasn't happened. And so the problem sort of continues.
After the hurricane, I was up in Kansas when the hurricane hit, and I just started teaching at Kansas State University. I had a nonprofit that I started about 5 years ago. We mainly were able to work on smaller interventions, kind of low cost, minimum resources. But over the years, I'd always wanted to be able to address, you know, have the capacity as a nonprofit to address natural disasters, crises of this kind of, you know, scale.
Right.
You know, I've been following the work of Cameron Sinclair and Architecture for Humanity, and you know, when 9/11 happened, the Bam earthquake and the tsunami, you know, we just didn't have the capacity to really get involved in any meaningful way right after those things happened. So I guess teaching at K-State gave me the you know, the feeling that I was able to do something for the people down here. And besides, I loved it. I grew up about 3 hours east of here and spent a lot of time in New Orleans, and I really wanted to do something positive to help people get back on their feet. You know, I organized a spring break trip. Came down here with about 14, 15 students from Kansas. Finished gutting Ronald's house. Did some design work. We actually didn't do a whole lot of design work. We mainly gutted the house mainly, but we did about 2 hours of design work here, which was good because I wanted to have a community review, which we had. And this is in March, and nobody was here. You could hear crickets.
Right. It was very empty at the time.
Well, we had about 60, 70 people out here.
Yeah, once the word was put out that there was cooking going on Tupelo Street, yeah, everybody came. It was just a place, a focal point of gathering, sharing stories, and looking forward to the future.
Yeah, and there were a lot of people that you saw, I guess, that you hadn't seen since
The storm. Everybody was so dispersed so far, but they would just travel around the community, just looking for a little hope to to encourage them on coming back home.
So at that point, we went back to Kansas and spent about 2 months getting the building designed and buildable. And that was the main thing, that we had to design a building in 2 months so we could actually come back and build. Show you how it works. Yeah, so we use these little, they talk about educating people down here and everything else. Ronald's no dummy. He's not a child. I didn't have to come down here and say, Ronald, the water might come again, Ronald, and you might be hurt, or you're going to lose your home. And I know there are larger issues at stake too, but, we talked to Ronald when we came down here, and we said, we told him what we thought, and Ronald said, look, I went through Hurricane Betsy. Everybody in this neighborhood knows that this place is about water. There's water all around them all the time. They're used to it, they live in it, but this is where they're from. This is their land. In a country that, and everybody knows this, has systematically, over the years, created a social underclass in this country. This is a place where those people, they own this place almost entirely. It's not renters, it's not derelict housing projects. They're homes that people can be proud of, and they have been proud of for over 100 years. And it's more than a memory of a place. This is roots, right here. Best sense of community that I've ever had in my whole life being here, which is why I moved back in here. Ronald worked for 30 years for the city, breaking his back to put in streetcar lines, and that's a major investment, and I think the investment needs to be reciprocated in some way to the people down here.
But, when you look at the effort that people putting in to bring back not just the Lord Thankful, but the city of New Orleans, it makes a big old statement. And when you speak about the education of the people, they did come in here and educated the people on how they could eliminate their lives with what y'all call that, new urbanism?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where, they just had this last big city planning meeting where they had to set up all across the country and everything. But you know what, though? They did that for months. They still had 1,000 people attended that meeting, right? But at the same time, all these planners and things haven't done nothing but educated us to the point where we were able to tell them, oh, what you showing me on this map, that's where I used to live. That you want to turn it into a green space. It's a long road, because our government still playing games with us with the money, with the road to recovery and stuff like that. I don't even see why they use the word recovery, because we don't give you no money to recover. So there's all of that, but with the will of the people, the spirit, we'll be back.
Wade in the water, come on and wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God, my God, gonna trouble the water.